Let's move on to, I think, Northborough Reserve. Councillor Darby is going to move it. Councillor, Hills might second it.
Second.
It sounds like it's pretty straightforward. The feedback I have from our esteemed local members is that this is not a drama. Is there any need to discuss this? We think no. I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against,
Aye.
carried. Thank you.
Don't you love the after lunch slot?
Oh, I tell you. I also love councillors who are able to be very, very clear with their local needs and give us good advice. So, item 13. I have read this report and admitted to the staff that it took a few readings. So I've asked our key people just to step us through this so that we're very clear what we're doing every step of the way. So, thank you, team. Step us through.
Bless you.
Perfect. Thank you, Madam Chairperson. There is a degree of complexity, and I suppose that this committee is coming halfway through a piece of work that we started in the previous term. So if I take you back to that previous term and explain where we are today. So we started a process in March of last year looking at developing a sports facilities investment plan. The first piece of advice we provided was a discussion document. We went out for public consultation, discussed it with key stakeholders within the sport and recreation sector and also with local boards. And the purpose of that was really to engage all of those stakeholders in helping us build that plan. So we tested some ideas in terms of looking at the council's current approach to investment, suggested that the council should take a more principled-based approach, establish some criteria, be really clear in terms of what outcomes the council was looking to invest in, and then that would allow us to develop the plan. So following that engagement, we wrote an analysis of the submissions and feedback that we got, presented that to the Parks, Sport and Recreation Committee in July of 2016, and also at the same time sought agreement on key components of the plan. So what we're doing is, because of the degree of complexity involved, is building the plan piece by piece. So we're trying to deal with bite-sized chunks as we go through. So in July we asked the committee to agree on the desired outcomes, the investment principles and the scope and focus of council investment. This report now takes those principles and applies them to how council has previously invested in sports facilities. So we use those principles as evaluation criteria to look at forms of investment. Within the work program coming up, in April of 17, we're looking to provide another report which looks at the outcome measurement and monitoring of council investment. In June of this year, also a report around revenue streams for investment in sports facilities. With a view that we'll have a draft plan towards the end of the year, go through another phase of public consultation. So the decisions being made here today are just in principle ones that again allow us to develop the plan. They will be tested with the public, local boards and the key stakeholders again, and we will come back to this committee to finalise and adopt the plan. It's really useful to talk about scope. So previously on the item around the community facilities network plan, clarification was provided that pools sit outside of the sports facilities investment. Now part of that is because those facilities, the model is to co-locate them with other council facilities. Also really clear that the scope doesn't include stadia. So that is all regional facilities Auckland, their stadia strategy. Doesn't include play, so that next committee we're looking to bring a discussion document around investment in play. Doesn't include sports fields, that's another program of investment. Doesn't include active recreation, for example, greenways, esplanades, regional parks. That'll be a separate investment plan. And we already have the open space provision policy which informs our decisions around acquisition and disposal of open space. So if I take you to what this paper is really about, We took the investment principles that were agreed in the previous term, which were making sure investments were outcome focused, that there was accountability, there was equity, and that they were financially sustainable. We applied those to current forms of investment, and those are community or commercial leases, community loans and loan guarantees, rates, remissions and postponements, as well as sport and recreation grants. And the purpose of that was to look at the future in terms of how we can improve the quality of council's decision making when it comes to investments in sport and recreation. So now if we turn into the report itself, if we go investment type by investment type, so we currently have 453 community leases to sports organisations, and there are 4 commercial leases to golf clubs. The evaluation found that there was generally good alignment with community leases and the outcomes and the investment principles that we're seeking to achieve. However, there were a few issues, and some of these were also raised during that public consultation back in March of last year by a range of partners. Quite a degree of inconsistency in terms of lease terms and conditions, and also when it comes to the rents payable on council land. There was a lack of clarity around some of the expected outcomes from the leases, lack of clarity around how council makes decisions on which type of lease to use. So then that takes you through to the decision that's proposed, which was suggesting that in the investment plan we specify that we will use community and commercial leases as a form of investment. Perhaps I might end just by giving you a practical example, so we sort of move from the theoretical to the practical. So an example might be we have an existing lease with a boat club in Waiheke. They've paid nominally $1 a year since 1982. There's no end date to that lease term, and we don't have any real insight in terms of what are the outcomes delivered from that investment of a council asset. We don't know the membership, how that reflects the demographics of the neighbouring community.
That's bad.
Yep. So maybe I'll pause and we can answer questions on this particular issue.
So will it work for you as we get to each recommendation that we just check that people understand? Because when you look at the recommendations then on page 74, we're agreeing that the recommendations in here be included in the draft plan, so we kind of need to understand the breakdown of what each recommendation means. So if that makes sense, that feels like a reasonable way to do it. So people are clear what's expected with this recommendation.
But just through the chair, we're on page 79 of your report.
Yep. Okay, so shall we plug on? Feel free to ask, if you suddenly realise that you get to the next recommendation, you want to go back to this one, that's fine. Councillor Walker?
I just wanted to hear the rest of the example that Paul was given. You started off with the example of some club somewhere that was on a peppercorn rental, and so I got that, but what's the new situation going forward?
Within the body of the report, we also talk about the development of an implementation guide to inform the putting into practice of the investment plan. So what we would look to do would develop some formal guidelines in terms of how we use leases, look to bring in some consistency. So one of the proposals is that there's a greater alignment between the size and the value of the asset and potentially the lease on it. Other options in terms of looking at some incentives also to drive some of the participation outcomes we might be looking for. So there's potentially changes in the structure of the rent, but also looking at incentives built into that as well.
Councillor?
I just have a related question around this. Quite obviously, if we change the regime that we've got, there's going to be more effort required, more resourcing required on the part of those organisations to adapt to our changes. Quite obviously, we're going to be needing more information from them, substantiation. There's quite a bit of work there on the part of a club or society, and I know many of these clubs and things are having enough trouble now in dealing with demographic changes, a whole range of things that are occurring across Auckland that are quite rapid. So are we going to have some work around what we need to do to facilitate clubs and societies? Because as much and all as we're asking for something, there's the issue around delivery. It's not in our interest for a massive number of clubs and the likes to fall over and to impose a requirement on us to pick up, and I doubt that we'd be able to.
Just through the chair, so certainly those are things that we'll be looking at in terms of the implementation guide, the practicality of implementing it, but I suppose at a simple reporting level we would expect that these clubs would be able to tell us the number of their members, some of the demographic profiles of their membership, and I guess a simple instrument may be a letter of expectation between us and the leaseholders that sort of say, these are the outcomes we're looking for, we would expect you would be able to report annually against those, and we would expect they would have membership data and be able to share that with us.
Okay, thank you. So I've got Councillor Cooper, Member Wilcox and Councillor Clow on this one.
Yes, please.
Yep, Councillor Cooper.
I don't know if you can answer my question, but just my concerns in general about community leases. Sometimes we have such long community leases and then we decide to change the use of the land, especially if it's not on parkland. We get caught up, and we had some examples of that in Waitakere. We had to pay out, 20 years lease when we wanted to change something. So I hope that we were going to not get ourselves into those situations again. The other issues, then we do get pulled into really long leases because outside organisations want to help with building a building or something like that, and then the people that are leasing our land feel like they've got a perpetual right to it because they put money into a building there. And so I suppose it's trying to balance out all those needs. I mean, it's better that we're not building it, but then in the end something happens and we still, so those are my concerns around long leases, but I understand the need to balance the timing of the lease or the length of the lease so that they can get outside funding to build something. But I do feel like sometimes we have some organisations just capture our spaces. For example, rugby seems to get an awful lot of clubs on our land and sometimes soccer, whereas hockey can't even manage to get any of our land. They have to go and find other places. So there seems to be a lot of inequity around sport codes having access to our land and so that's my concern, and I don't know how you address this in this.
Through the chair, certainly the lease terms and durations across the legacy councils varied quite considerably. We certainly know of instances where the leases were granted were at 99 years plus. And that certainly constrains council. The current approach is maximum of 33 years, however, I think that should also be an exceptional basis, and part of the guidance in terms of the implementation of this plan would be really to look at the duration of those leases as well as the rental terms under those arrangements. The second point really was that we also deal with a perception issue when it comes to leases, and that the duration of those leases, some of the leaseholders start to feel like it's their asset rather than a community asset, and that is a challenge that we do face.
It's a tricky one. Good luck unwinding some of those leases. I've got Member Wilcox and then Councillor Clow and then back to Councillor Walker.
So my question is really about the terms that we're going to impose or ask from our leases, and it's basically, we had the unhappy experience of going to a club whose one of their constitutional points was we do not have women in our club, and they were using our land. So of our council land, and I have to say that has been changed now. But I'm looking at 85 in your Maori impact statement, and I'm wondering, are those outcomes going to be specified within the terms? I would have thought that would be a given, seeing as we have that already in our sports kaupapa. But would they be in all commercial leases, or would they just be in specific ones? I'm not talking about the guy setting up a hot dog stand at the park for a day, but I'm talking more about where there's extensive use of community and council facilities.
Through the chair, Member Wilcox has raised an issue that we have, again, experienced from time to time, and that we have some leaseholders that will be fair to say their activities don't appear to line up with the sort of community benefit that we would expect. So one of the proposals is, and we currently don't have this ability within our lease terms, is that there should be some automatic termination clauses. And that would be on the basis of evidence of a breach of the Human Rights Act or the Bill of Rights Act. So we would be able to go to the leaseholder and say, well, look, we have evidence of this. You are no longer operating in the interests of the communities that we represent. That would be a basis on which to terminate